just gonna leave me here alone. Oh, we got some people joining. Bella, look. Got people looking at us. Say hi.
Actively say that this is perhaps the most inhumane and vicious crime that I have handled out of the thousands of cases that I have seen. And nothing less than a maximum sentence would be appropriate, and anything less than the maximum sentence would depreciate the seriousness of this offense. Deputies, I would respectfully ask that you take this defendant into custody and have him serve the rest of his life in the Department of Corrections. We are in recess.
If this stillness holds you, a quiet gesture helps sustain these long-form investigations. Taking a moment to like the video or subscribe allows stories like this to be examined with the time and care they demand, bringing hidden truths into focus, one layer at a time.
And I'll go get you when we're done.
Yeah, okay, cool.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, okay.
Thanks. I'm going to have a seat right here, Chris.
Sit on this?
Yep, I know. I'll explain what that is here in a little bit, but you don't have to worry. It's not on or anything right now. It's not gonna buzz you or anything.
I've never done this before.
I know. A lot of people haven't had polygraphs before. It's not like a normal thing that people go through. A lot of people, like obviously in law enforcement and places like that, they have to go through polygraphs for their job. But other than that, most people never take a polygraph in their entire life. So.
Yeah, so I have no idea what to expect, honestly.
Yeah. So how are you feeling today?
I'm sick to my stomach, honestly. The first day I thought, okay, she was just somewhere.
Sure.
And after yesterday, all the activity at my house, I didn't know, it went to the other extreme. I've just been sick to my stomach that either somebody has her or she's in trouble and the kids are not safe either.
Right. Well, and I think that's totally awesome that you're here today. I mean,
It begins in a gray that does not yet belong to day or night. The sky over Frederick holds a colorless light, thin and undecided, as if the morning has not fully committed to arriving. Street lamps cast pale circles on the asphalt, their glow diluted by the hour. The air is still. Lawns lie damp from automatic sprinklers that finished their cycles while the neighborhood slept. Houses line the curved street in quiet formation, one after another, variations on the same design, each with its own small patch of grass and concrete. At the edge of the cul-de-sac, a truck is already in motion. It reverses slowly into a driveway, taillights glowing briefly against the front of a 2-story house. The truck eases into position, backed up toward the garage, rear accessible to the open world. There is nothing dramatic in the movement. To anyone awake enough to see it, it would look like an early start for someone whose workday begins before sunrise. The house itself appears unremarkable. Neutral siding, modest porch. A front door set back under a small overhang. A white SUV sits in front, unmoving, its windows dark, its interior still. There is no visible sign that this address is different from any of the others. No broken glass, no open doors, no lights flashing within. A figure moves between the doorway and the truck. The camera that records this scene does so without judgment. Its fixed lens takes in each passage, a form stepping out of the house, carrying something, approaching the rear of the truck, lifting, adjusting, returning. The image is grainy, the light poor, the shapes indistinct.
I commend you. We do this in all of our missing person cases, so don't think that we're just singling you out like, oh my gosh, they want me to take a polygraph. anytime, you know, someone was the last person to see people, or, you know, it's a missing person case, we start from the inside and we work out. I mean, that's pretty much what we do. So I've done polygraphs on the Jessica Ridgway case. I don't know if you were here for that.
The name sounds
The
familiar.
little girl that went missing in Westminster and all
Okay.
that, yeah. And then just the one that we had in Thornton last year or the year before. So we do this all the time. So please don't think that you're being singled out. Like this is one way that if you didn't have anything to do with it, that we can let the investigators know, the people that really do need to know, that are looking for your wife and your little girls, to let them know, like, you know what, don't focus on Chris, focus over here, because obviously we've already cleared him, he's good to go. Now focus on the real person that did something to this, you know,
Okay.
to Shanann and little girl. So,
Okay.
okay. So I am, my name is Tammy. If you can call me Tammy, I'm an agent with the Colorado Bureau of Investigation. So it's a CBI. It's kind of like the FBI, but for Colorado.
Okay.
So what our role is, just so you know, is anytime a law enforcement agency or a district attorney's office or the governor needs assistance with a case, they can call the CBI to come out and assist them.
Okay.
So obviously in this, you know, type of case, they're calling in all the resources that they can, which includes me, who works out of the Denver office, and I also do polygraphs. So they asked me if I would be willing to come here and chat with you and hopefully get you cleared up and on your way, because it sounds like that's what you're here for, and
Yeah,
that's awesome, because that's mostly what people want to do, is like, dude, you're looking at the wrong person. Like, I just want to show you I had nothing to do with this, and then you guys can get on your way and, you know, do your investigation somewhere else. So,
Okay.
because that helps us, because then we don't have to keep focusing on Chris. Does that make sense to
Thanks,
you?
yeah.
Okay. This polygraph today is going to be recorded.
Okay.
Obviously, it would be dumb if I didn't, because what if at the end I said you said whatever and you really didn't say it? Obviously, they could go back and look at the recording. There's a camera right there. And there's also a backup digital recording that I'm doing.
Okay.
There is no sound, only movement traced against the dull gray of the approaching dawn. Later, the exact span of this footage will be measured in minutes and seconds. It will be paused, rewound, slowed down. It will become one of the central fragments around which an entire story is arranged. People will lean towards screens, studying the slight tilt of shoulders, the duration of pauses at the truck's open rear, the angle of the vehicle in the drive. They will try to read intention in the blurred motions. But in this moment, the footage exists only as data on a device mounted under the eaves of a neighboring house. The truck completes its loading. The figure climbs into the driver's seat. The vehicle pulls forward, turns out of the driveway, and disappears from the frame. The white SUV remains where it was, its surface beginning to reflect the faint light of a day that has not yet fully arrived. Inside the house, there is now a stillness that no one outside can interpret correctly. From the street, the silence is unremarkable. Many homes are quiet at this hour. Curtains stay drawn. The only sounds are distant: a dog barking somewhere beyond the neighborhood, a lone car on a main road, a faint hum of electrical infrastructure. There is nothing to distinguish this address from hundreds of similar structures built across the Front Range in the last decade.
Just wait. Hi guys, say
What's
hi,
going
Bella. We gotta get you dressed, kid.
I
Look
know,
what Bella's
right?
eating. Bella's eating some of the ingredients.
She got a nice little bowl of chocolate chips.
Look at that. What is that, Bella? Can you show them? What is it? Is it chocolate?
Is it chocolate?
It's chocolate little mini morsels, right? Yeah, good job. So she's been eating my peanut butter and the chocolate morsels so far today. So we're gonna let a few more people hop on, and then we're gonna get cooking here, and we'll explain to you what we're cooking up over here. So
Yeah, welcome to the 12 days of Christmas, Lavelle Day, and even though I like to claim that I could probably cook. I can't at all. So I'm gonna let my wife do all the cooking. She's gonna make up some Thrive Bites for us.
And I'm gonna go wash my hands real fast.
And yet, by the time the truck has merged onto the road that leads away from the subdivision, the central fact of this story is already set. 3 lives have ended within these walls. A 4th, still in the early stages of existence, has been extinguished without ever crossing the threshold into independent breath. The house holds remnants of them, their possessions, their images, the marks of their daily movements, but not their living bodies. Miles away, in the direction the truck is traveling, the land opens. The tidy geometry of the subdivision gives way to broader fields, utility corridors, and stretches of dirt and gravel roads. On the horizon, metal structures begin to rise, tanks standing on steel legs, pipes running across the ground, stacks and equipment forming thin silhouettes against an enlarging sky. These installations are part of an energy network that most residents of the nearby towns register only as distant landmarks or dim shapes glimpsed while driving. One of those sites, among many, will become the second anchor of this story. Its coordinates are fixed in industrial map systems, its capacities documented in company logs. For years, its tanks have held only crude oil. The soil around it has been disturbed in routine ways by vehicles and maintenance work. It is designed to store, not to reveal. On this day, however, it will receive something else, something the man in the truck believes he can make disappear within its obscurity. The distance between the house in Frederick and this facility is not great when measured by miles. The distance between what they represent, the idea of home and the idea of extraction, the private and the industrial, is far greater. It is across this distance that the truck moves, carrying not only tools and equipment, but the evidence of a decision that has already been made, carried out, and now must be concealed. To understand how this ordinary arc, a man leaving a house for work before dawn, came to contain such weight, it is necessary to widen the lens and step back into the life that unfolded before this morning. Frederick, Colorado, in the late 2010s, is part of a belt of towns reshaped by growth. Fields that once stretched uninterrupted have been divided, surveyed, and overlaid with plans. Developers have carved cul-de-sacs where there were none, poured foundations where grass and scrub once grew. New schools, gas stations, and small commercial centers have followed. The promise attached to these subdivisions is clear and powerful: clean streets, newer homes, perceived safety, reasonable commutes, the chance to step into a version of the American story where effort is rewarded with stability. The house on Saratoga Trail was one such promise made concrete. When it was built, it was indistinguishable from any other new construction in the area. When it was purchased and furnished, it became specific to one family's narrative. For Shanann, the woman who would move into it, it represented more than square footage and bedrooms. It represented a victory over years of difficulty, a tangible signal that she had pulled herself, and by extension her family, out of a past marked by illness and financial collapse. Her earlier life had not followed a smooth trajectory. Chronic health problems had carved into it, limiting her capacity at times, dictating where her energy could and could not go. Medical bills accumulated. The stress of managing symptoms and debt pressed on every aspect of her existence. The dissolution of a previous marriage underscored the fragility of the structures she was trying to build. When she met Chris, he entered this landscape as a quieter presence. He was not the kind of person who filled a room on arrival. His demeanor was consistently restrained, calm, polite, understated. He worked with his hands and his attention, maintaining equipment, handling tools, driving long distances between sites. There was an appeal in that steadiness, especially to someone whose own life had been repeatedly disturbed by forces she could not control. Over time, their lives twined together. They married. They moved into houses that reflected incremental improvements in their circumstances. They navigated health scares, periods of financial strain, and the ordinary conflicts that accompany any sustained partnership. When the opportunity came to buy a newly built home in this growing subdivision, a place with fresh paint, clean lines, enough space for the family they envisioned, Shannon seized it with the intensity of someone who has known what it is to be without. The photos taken shortly after they moved in showrooms that are neat, but not yet fully settled. Furniture is in place. Walls bear a few early decorations. The kitchen has the polished emptiness of a space not yet worn down by years of use. There is a sense of anticipation in these images, of birthday parties to come, holidays to be hosted, mornings and evenings passing under that roof with a rhythm that would become second nature. Then the children arrived. First Bella, then Celeste. Their names, like their faces, would become familiar far beyond the circles their parents imagined. In those early years, however, they were simply two small girls moving through the house in ways that tested and confirmed its ability to hold a family. Crayons and toys began to occupy corners and tabletops. Sippy cups and small shoes appeared where there had once been only adult belongings. Walls that had held only art now displayed printed photographs, a baby in a hospital blanket, a toddler in a costume, a family posing in coordinated outfits in front of seasonal backdrops. Shannon embraced motherhood with a characteristically directed energy. She researched, planned, documented. Feeding schedules, medical appointments, developmental milestones, all were folded into a life that also included her work in direct sales. The house became a stage for this work. The kitchen, the living room, the dining area, each served in turn as a backdrop for videos in which she promoted products, shared personal updates, and presented her family as evidence that challenges could be overcome. On camera, she spoke at length about gratitude, persistence, and the life they were building. The girls featured prominently in these recordings. Their voices and faces drew attention. Their presence helped transform promotional content into glimpses of a domestic narrative that viewers could latch onto. When Bella hesitated at something, when Celeste moved with the fearless energy of a younger child, When Chris appeared in the background lifting or holding one of them, the family dynamic seemed, to outsiders, complete and coherent. Beneath this visible layer, multiple pressures continued to operate. Financially, the household was not as secure as the images suggested. Bankruptcy had featured in their past. Creditors had not vanished. The mortgage on the new house was large relative to their resources. The income from Shannon's work fluctuated with the nature of the business and the effort she could sustain. The oil and gas job provided steady pay but was subject to the inherent uncertainties of that industry. Emotionally, the roles within the marriage had begun to solidify in ways that did not always suit both partners. Shannon carried much of the visible responsibility for organizing family life, appointments, school choices, trips, holiday planning. She also shouldered the emotional labor of maintaining close contact with extended family and broader social networks. Her personality inclined toward directness and intensity. She was not hesitant to express dissatisfaction or to push for change when she felt it was needed. Chris moved in a more withdrawn pattern. He performed tasks, attended events, and fulfilled obligations, but often without the same outward expressiveness. He was, to many who observed them, the steady complement to her drive. Yet this outward balance did not necessarily reflect internal equilibrium. Over years, small resentments, unexpressed frustrations, and differences in communication style can accumulate quietly, even in households that appear cohesive. The diagnosis of lupus and other medical issues intensified certain dynamics. Shannon's need for rest, for predictive routines, for control over aspects of her environment grew out of genuine necessity. Treatments required adherence. Symptoms demanded attention. The family's health insurance, scheduling, and financial planning had to align with these needs. In this context, the house became not only a home, but a controlled environment in which she could manage variables as much as possible. For Chris, this meant that his role as partner often included being the reliable physical presence, the one who compensated when her energy flagged, who adapted to the rhythms dictated by her health. It is a role that can be fulfilling and bonding. It can also, if not processed and discussed openly, give rise to a sense of being constrained, overshadowed, or taken for granted. The introduction of a third child into this already complex structure added new weight. When Shannon became pregnant again, her social media posts presented this development as a joyful continuation of their story. The family was expanding. A name was chosen. A reveal was filmed, framed, shared. The unborn child, Nico, entered the narrative as a promise, a son to complete the picture already presented to the world. For her, this pregnancy represented both hope and a renewed affirmation of the life she believed they were still building together. For him, as later evidence suggests, it coincided with a deepening internal crisis. By this time, he had begun a relationship outside the marriage. It developed within the context of his work, a space that was physically and emotionally separate from the Frederick house. At job sites, away from the domestic environment shaped by Shannon's needs and the children's demands, he encountered someone who did not know him as a caretaker in the same way, who saw him instead as an individual with the capacity to start fresh. That perception and his response to it became a catalyst. He started to envision a future in which he was no longer the husband in the background of Shannon's videos, no longer the father in a high-debt household, no longer someone whose daily life was structured around medical schedules, product promotions, and the ongoing management of past financial missteps. In the parallel world suggested by the affair, he could imagine a simpler existence, fewer responsibilities, fewer constraints, a renewed sense of personal centrality. The affair did not create his dissatisfaction, but it gave it a focal point and a direction. Evidence from messages, searches, and spending patterns in this period shows him exploring possibilities that had no place within the life in Frederick. Trips with the other woman, apartments that might be rented, financial plans that implicitly assumed an absence of current familial obligations. He did not, however, bring these explorations fully into the open. Instead, he maintained two parallel narratives. In one, presented to Shannon, to family, and to the world, he was still the husband and father in the Frederick house, living within the language of gratitude and perseverance that she used so consistently. In the other, held largely within his own mind and in the channels of communication with his coworker, he was a man on the verge of leaving that identity behind. The summer of 2018 was the season in which these narratives came closest to colliding. Shannon's extended trip to North Carolina with the girls placed physical distance between them for weeks. She stayed with her family, managed tensions with his relatives, and tended to the girls' needs away from the underlying structures of the Colorado house. He remained behind for much of this time, moving more fully into the world of his affair, tasting what it would be like to live without the constant presence of his wife and daughters. The contrast between these two modes of living, family man in Frederick, unattached partner in Colorado, grew sharper. By the time Shannon returned briefly to Colorado in the middle of the summer, she sensed a difference she could not ignore. His affection felt diminished. His words carried less warmth. The physical closeness that had once been unproblematic now seemed to require effort. Her messages to friends during this period reveal a woman trying to decipher these signals, attributing them at times to stress, at times to possible infidelity, at times to something in herself she feared she might have done wrong. He responded with partial truths. He acknowledged feeling distant, needing space, being unsure of his emotions. He did not, in those core conversations, fully describe the scope of his alternate life. He did not admit that he had already crossed lines that transformed marital struggle into something else entirely. In preserving this secrecy, he preserved for himself a mental image of a clean break that did not yet have to withstand the realities of confrontation, division of assets, or legal negotiation. It was into this tense, unresolved atmosphere that the August work trip to Arizona was introduced. Shannon traveled there with colleagues for a company event focused on motivation, opportunity, and renewed commitment to the business that had become a major part of her identity. While away, she continued to think, communicate, and worry about her marriage. Her messages reflected a growing conviction that something fundamental was wrong, coupled with a determination to force clarity when she returned. In Arizona hotel rooms and conference halls, she rehearsed in her mind the conversation she intended to have at home. In Colorado, during those same days, he continued to inhabit the role of a man already half gone, spending time with the other woman, engaging in behaviors that suggested not a temporary lapse, but a reorientation of loyalty and desire. The fault line between their perceptions lengthened and deepened. By the time her plane lifted off from Phoenix toward Denver, the distance between what she believed was possible and what he was prepared, privately, to do had grown into a chasm. She still envisioned a future in which hard conversations, counseling, or at worst, separation would reshape their lives. He had begun to contemplate an outcome that removed the need to navigate any of those paths. When the aircraft touched down in Colorado after midnight, she was one traveler among many. Passengers collected their bags, walked through halls under fluorescent lights, made their way toward waiting cars. The friend who would drive her home pulled up outside the terminal. They loaded luggage, merged onto the highway, and moved north toward the subdivision where the beige house waited under a sky that was darkening toward its deepest point before dawn. At that hour, the streets of Saratoga Trail were largely empty. Porch lights were off or dimmed. Most windows were dark. The white SUV in the Watts driveway sat motionless. The friend's vehicle pulled in, stopped, idled. Shannon stepped out with her bag, moved up the path to the front door she had walked through hundreds of times. For a short moment, framed in the wash of headlights, she was visible between car and house. Then the door opened, she passed inside, and the house closed around her. The door latched. Behind it, in stairwells and hallways and rooms whose dimensions were by then intimately familiar to her, the final hours of her life were beginning, though nothing in the arrangement of furniture or the play of light yet indicated that to the eye. Inside, the house held the familiar shapes of their shared life, but the atmosphere was shifted by a tension that had been building for months. Upstairs, the master bedroom waited at the end of the hallway, the same room where they had slept, argued, reconciled, and planned. The bed stood against the wall, its headboard facing the doorway, its sheets turned down from earlier. On the dresser, small personal objects lay where they had been left: jewelry dishes, bottles, folded items, the ordinary clutter of a lived-in space. The air in that room was heavy in a way that had nothing to do with temperature. The conversation that unfolded there in the late hours of the night and the earliest hours of the morning left no documentary record. What can be reconstructed is not the exact words, but the trajectory. A woman returning from travel, determined to address a growing distance. A man who had already allowed his mind to move beyond the life they shared, confronted with the imminent collapse of secrecy. The scene was not loud. Neighbors heard no disturbance. The girls remained asleep in their rooms, undisturbed, small bodies curled under blankets that had been tucked around them before their mother left for Arizona. The dog settled in his usual space. The house enclosed these separate states of unconsciousness and conflict without offering any sign to the outside world. At some point, the conflict in the bedroom ceased to be verbal and became physical. The specific mechanisms, seconds of struggle, the position of hands, the angle of the mattress, are known only in outline from later admissions and from the physical traces left behind. A body's resistance, once overcome, gives way to stillness. That transition is profound but produces very little sound. A person is alive, then not. Nerve signals stop. The familiar warmth of an inhabited presence begins an invisible decline. When it was over, the room bore marks of the struggle that were less obvious than the reality they signified. The sheets, once a neutral field of fabric, were disturbed in patterns that would later draw investigative attention. Certain areas of the mattress held fluorescence under alternate light, recording what had happened there in ways the naked eye did not immediately register. On the surface, the room could still be walked through without immediate alarm. A stranger could have glanced in and seen only a bed that needed remaking. The man who stood in this room now faced not a hypothetical future without his family, but an actual present in which his wife lay lifeless a few feet away. In this moment, there remained paths that would have led outward toward help, admission, surrender. Instead, he chose to move further inward, into a sequence of acts that would extend what had occurred from one body to three, from one room to an entire house, from a domestic tragedy to a crime that would shock far beyond the boundaries of this subdivision. He did not call anyone. He did not leave the house seeking assistance. The decision, once made, remained contained within the geometry of the home and the silent corridors of his mind. Elsewhere on the upper floor, the girls still slept. Their rooms bore all the hallmarks of childhood: small beds, soft toys, blankets with familiar patterns, clothing in drawers and on hangers, night lights or lamps positioned to comfort against the darkness. Posters or decals on the walls reflected preferences expressed in short lives, characters chosen, colors liked, the early imprint of identity. The distance from the master bedroom to those rooms was only a few steps along the hall. The act of walking it, carrying in his body the knowledge of what he had just done, marks one of the most chilling transitions in this narrative. Within a handful of seconds, he moved from the space where his partner lay dead to the thresholds of the rooms where his children slept, their breathing regular, their awareness absent. The order in which he entered and left those rooms would later be discussed, tested against timelines and his own inconsistent accounts. What remains constant is the outcome. The lives of both girls ended in that house before dawn. The methods mirrored in grim efficiency what he had done in the bedroom: removal of breath, compression of airway, the application of force by the very hands that had previously carried, fed and comforted them. There were no neighbors awake to hear anything. No cameras inside to capture those minutes. The house, with its carpeted floors and insulated walls, absorbed what little sound there may have been. When he was done, the second floor of the house no longer contained any living member of the family it had been built to shelter, apart from himself. The bodies of his wife and daughters now presented to him a problem to be managed. His focus shifted from the acts themselves to their concealment. This pivot, from violence to logistics, marks another disturbing feature of the case. The decision-making that follows is organized, sequential, and pragmatic, unconcerned with the dignity of those whose bodies he is moving. He stripped bedding from the master bed. Sheets and possibly a comforter became not just objects to be washed or discarded, but materials in which to wrap the evidence of what had been done. Things once chosen for color and texture, used for warmth and rest, were repurposed as coverings, as makeshift shrouds. As he moved through the house, up and down the stairs, he carried the weight of the bodies in a sequence of trips that would later be partially visible in the blurry footage of his neighbor's camera. The ground floor, with its open-plan kitchen and living area, now became a transit zone. The home's central spaces, once places of play and conversation, were briefly corridors in a process of removal. The same floor that had felt the girls' running footsteps now felt the stealthy passage of their wrapped forms. The garage, accessed from the interior, was his next stage. There, the work truck stood waiting, as it had on countless early mornings when he prepared for his shift. It was a familiar workspace, smelling of oil, dust, and the residue of previous jobs. Its rear compartment, meant for tools and equipment, now received a different load. He lifted and placed their bodies into the truck with movements that had to align with the realities of weight and leverage. Shannon's body, that of an adult woman, required more effort. The children, smaller and lighter, were arranged alongside. Each action was a crossing of another internal line, from killing to transport, from private domestic violence to the use of an employer's vehicle as an instrument in the aftermath of murder. The garage door framed these acts in the soft darkness before dawn. Had anyone walked by at that hour, the scene might have looked like nothing more than a man preparing for an early start, loading items into his work truck. The wrapping of bodies in sheets, the careful positioning to keep them from view, the closing of the rear compartment, all of it took place within the shielding enclosure of walls and a door that would open only briefly when the truck needed to exit. At some point, he returned inside to adjust details that, in his mind, might support a story of disappearance. Shannon's phone, wallet, and keys were left in the house in ways that would trouble those who cared about her once it became clear she was gone. Medication was not taken. The white SUV remained in the driveway. He did not create the scene of a planned departure. Instead, he left intact a tableau that silently contradicted any claim that she had simply walked away. On the second floor, certain items that had been used in the crimes, pillows, bedding, perhaps clothing, were collected or repositioned. In the girls' rooms, their absence was not marked by overturned furniture or obvious chaos. Their beds were left in conditions that would later raise subtle questions. The dog, shut away or left to roam a limited space, remained without his usual morning interactions. By the time the truck reversed out of the driveway, the interior of the house held only the aftereffects of violence and the traces of lives interrupted mid-flow. From the outside, however, it looked much as it had when she left days earlier, a middle-class home in a recently built neighborhood, blinds drawn, front step clean, vehicle parked in front, waiting for another day. The truck rolled through the sleeping subdivision, past other houses whose inhabitants were beginning to stir, but had not yet opened their doors. Its path took it out to broader roads, then to less traveled routes leading toward the oil site. The early hour meant minimal traffic. The sky began to lighten slowly, the gray deepening toward blue. On either side of the road, fields and industrial installations alternated, the landscape flattening and widening as it moved away from residential zones. Inside the cab, he was alone. There are no recordings of his expressions during that drive, no cameras capturing the set of his jaw or the direction of his gaze. What can be surmised is that he was engaged in a task, driving to a location he knew well, within a time frame that would allow him to complete what he intended before his workday would normally require certain checks and reports. The oil site loomed into view with the familiarity of routine. Tanks stood elevated on their supports, cylindrical shapes against the growing light. Piping and valves extended along the ground. Gravel crunched under the wheels as the truck turned in. No waiting crowds, no witnesses, just the open design of a facility built for function, to receive, hold, and move hydrocarbons extracted from the earth. He parked in a position that gave him relative privacy. The distance between his truck and nearby roads was enough that, at this hour, it was unlikely anyone would see the specifics of his movements. The surrounding openness, oddly, provided a kind of concealment. There were no close-set neighbors here, no windows across a narrow street, no security cameras mounted under the eaves of a house opposite. He began the process of removing the bodies. The ground he chose for the burial of Shannon was not marked by any special feature. It was simply an area where soil could be disturbed without immediately raising attention. The grave he dug was shallow, reflecting a combination of haste, physical limitation, and a belief that the remoteness of the site would delay discovery. The act of carrying her body from the truck to the excavation, of positioning it, of covering it with earth and whatever scrub or debris was at hand, was carried out with the same grim practicality that had defined his movements inside the house. Each shovelful of soil, each adjustment, further severed the physical connection between her and the home she had entered only hours earlier, believing she was returning to continue her life there. For the girls, he chose the tanks. These enormous containers, designed to hold thousands of gallons of oil, were accessible by ladders and hatches. The openings at the top were not designed for the passage of human bodies, particularly not those of children. Yet it was through these limited spaces that he forced their entry. The details of these actions are almost unbearable to contemplate in their full specificity. To reach the hatches, he had to climb while handling their small, wrapped forms. He had to open the lids, consider the dimensions, and make decisions about positioning and release. The choice to place each child in a separate tank suggests an attempt at further dispersal, as if fragmentation could increase the probability of concealment. When the lids were closed, the tanks held not only oil, but the remains of 2 lives that had once filled the Frederick house with movement and sound. The site, after these acts, appeared outwardly unchanged. From a distance, anyone driving past on a county road would see exactly what they had seen the day before: a cluster of tanks, a few structures, open land. Up close, the freshly disturbed soil over Shannon's grave and subtle traces of activity around the tanks would be visible to a trained eye, but not to casual inspection. The bodies were hidden, but not erased. The earth and the tanks had become, unwillingly, repositories of the truth he was trying to avoid. He did not leave immediately. He engaged, to some degree, in the tasks expected of him at such a site, checking readings, making notes, attending to the minimal work necessary to maintain the facade of a normal day. His phone records, his truck's GPS, and company logs would later form a precise account of where he was and when, but in these hours he remained, to those who saw only the surface, simply an employee at a remote location, going about his duties. Back in Frederick, the house sat in its unnatural stillness. The white SUV in the driveway remained unclaimed. The blinds stayed closed. Inside, silence took on a quality that would be felt strongly only when someone came looking. Objects held their positions as if in a photograph: the phone on the counter, the handbag, the shoes near the door. The girls' rooms contained their absence like a negative space, beds and toys waiting for occupants who would not return. The first stirrings of real-world concern began elsewhere. Phones in North Carolina and Colorado remained dark when they should have lit up with messages. A medical office noted a missed appointment. A friend in the same line of work, accustomed to nearly constant communication, registered the gap as something more than an inconvenience. The interconnected world that had made Shannon's life visible now made her silence conspicuous. Calls were placed, messages sent, voicemail answered with nothing but pre-recorded prompts. Hours later, when he drove back toward town, he did so into a reality that had already begun to shift under the weight of these unanswered attempts to reach her. The truck moved along the same roads it had traveled earlier, but the context was different. The early morning emptiness had given way to the usual circulation of a weekday. People commuted, ran errands, moved between appointments. The suburban streets he passed were fuller now, the air brighter, the sense that the day had properly begun more pronounced. As he turned into his subdivision, the house on Saratoga Trail came into view again. From his vantage point behind the wheel, it looked as it always did. But parked near it now was another vehicle, one that did not belong to the household, a friend's car, brought there by concern that had grown too large to contain. Soon, another presence would join it, a marked vehicle representing the first formal step in a chain of official attention that he had not anticipated would arrive so quickly. He pulled into his driveway, back into the frame of that quiet cul-de-sac, to find not the empty facade he had left behind, but a scene already beginning to organize itself around a new and urgent question. Where was Shannon? And where were the girls? He stepped out of the truck into a scene that was no longer entirely under his control. The subdivision that had been silent when he left now carried the ordinary noise of late morning. A lawnmower droned faintly in the distance. A delivery truck turned a corner at the far end of the street. The friend's vehicle in front of his house stood as a physical manifestation of a worry that had been growing all morning, amplified by every unanswered call and message. The front door, which had closed behind Shannon in the small hours, had not opened again. From the outside, that fact was beginning to matter. To those who knew her patterns, this was already more than a scheduling mishap. Her medical condition made routine important. Her personality made communication constant. For someone so consistently present in others' lives to fall suddenly silent was not in character. When he approached the house, he did so under the direct gaze of others. The friend who had driven Shannon home now carried a different kind of responsibility, feeling the weight of being the last person to see her alive outside the house. A patrol car, summoned when concern reached a threshold that demanded formal response, was already in position. An officer stood near the door, assessing the situation, taking in the demeanor of the man now walking toward them. From that point forward, every movement he made became part of a record. The officer's body-worn camera, active from the moment of arrival, captured the subtle details that the human eye might register only partially in real time: the pace of his steps, the way he carried his phone, the direction and duration of his glances, the tone of his responses, the order in which he volunteered information. They entered the house together. The threshold that had contained the night's events now admitted outsiders whose task was to determine whether this was a simple case of a missing person or the opening of something far more grave. The interior, seen through the camera's unblinking eye, appeared at first to hold nothing overtly disturbing. Rooms were tidy within the range of normal family disorder. Dishes, toys, and personal items sat where they might on any day. Yet certain elements, when viewed in context, stood out almost immediately. Her phone lay on a surface, charging, as if waiting for the hand that usually reached for it constantly. Her handbag, with identification and payment cards, remained in the house. Medication sat where it was normally stored. The SUV, visible through front windows, was still in the driveway. These facts combined to form a picture that did not align with a voluntary, planned departure. The officer moved through the spaces methodically. Upstairs, the master bedroom drew particular scrutiny. The bed, stripped of much of its usual bedding, showed a bare mattress with patterns that suggested removal. A sheet was missing. The mattress itself bore faint discolorations that did not fit the ordinary logic of a recently used bed. These details did not yet constitute proof of harm, but they introduced a disquieting note into the assessment. In the girls' rooms, the emptiness of the beds felt heavier than the absence of toys. Their small possessions were present: clothes, stuffed animals, blankets. Nothing suggested that belongings had been packed or that preparations for a trip had been made. The difference between a room left for school or a short errand and a room left empty by a long absence is intangible, but perceivable. This felt like the latter. On the ground floor, the dog moved with a restlessness that hinted at confusion. Animals are not reliable witnesses in any formal sense, yet the absence of their usual humans alters their behavior. The dog's movements, pacing, occasional whines, moments of alert stillness, added another layer to the impression that the house had been left in a hurry only by the man now walking through it with officer and friend. As he answered questions, his manner was outwardly cooperative. He unlocked doors, opened closets, pointed out where things usually were. He demonstrated certain features of the alarm system, mentioned routine details about the family's schedule, speculated aloud about possibilities for where she might have gone. His words, though not reproduced here, are preserved in transcripts and recordings. What matters in this reconstruction is the mismatch between the content of those speculations and the physical facts of the scene. The officer noted each inconsistency. A woman described as prone to carrying her phone everywhere had left it behind. Someone said to be vigilant about her medication had not taken it. A mother known to rely on her vehicle for movement with 2 small children had left that vehicle in place. The explanation that she might have gone to a friend's house or simply taken a walk sounded increasingly thin against this backdrop. The concern now expanded beyond the friend who had first raised the alarm. Dispatch logs began to reflect a developing situation. Supervisors were notified. The missing persons report took shape not as a routine entry, but as the starting point for a potentially serious investigation. The house, once a private space, became a site of inquiry. Every object within it was now a potential piece of a larger pattern. Then an offer from across the street introduced a crucial element. A neighbor, aware of activity outside and curious about the presence of law enforcement, mentioned that his home security system included a camera that captured part of the Watts driveway. The officer accepted the invitation to view the footage, understanding that in cases of unexplained absence, small clips of video can sometimes provide decisive information. In the neighbor's living room, the screen showed what the lens had recorded in the early hours. The timestamp indicated the period before dawn. There, in the grainy frame, was the familiar shape of the white SUV sitting still. Then, the darker mass of the work truck reversed into view, its rear aligning with the garage. A figure moved between house and vehicle, repeatedly in brief, purposeful bursts. Objects were loaded. The truck idled, then pulled forward and out of frame. This was not in itself proof of wrongdoing. Many workers load equipment early in the morning. Vehicles come and go. However, in combination with the fact that the woman and children were now missing, and that the truck had been at a remote site that day, this sequence took on a different significance. It raised the possibility that the last time they had been at the house, they had left not in the SUV, but in that truck. Equally telling in that room was his reaction to the footage. The officer's body cam captured not only the screen, but the man watching it. His posture stiffened. His breathing, by subtle measures, altered. He shifted his weight from foot to foot. His comments in tone and content reflected a level of discomfort that the neighbor later described to investigators as unusual for someone ostensibly hoping that the footage might yield clues to the whereabouts of his family. When the officer and the man stepped back outside, the informal assessment among those on scene had shifted. This was no longer primarily a question of whether Shannon might have chosen to leave of her own accord. It was increasingly a question of whether the person last known to have been in the house with her and the girls was telling the truth about the events of that night and morning. Law enforcement's response adjusted accordingly. Search efforts expanded, but so did the investigatory focus on him. Interviews were scheduled. Records began to be requested, phone logs, work GPS data, surveillance from other locations. Inside the house, further documentation would capture every room in detail, preserving the state of things at this critical juncture. From the outside, the picture presented to the public remained, for the moment, aligned with the language of a search. Images of Shannon and the girls appeared in local media, then regional, then national coverage. Their faces, hers composed and animated, theirs open with the uncomplicated expressions of small children, were shown alongside the words used in such situations: missing, last seen, concerns for welfare. A photograph of the family together, taken during a happier period, circulated widely. He participated outwardly in this phase. Standing on his front porch in front of cameras, he delivered statements that projected worry and an appeal for their return. His arms folded, his eyes scanning, his words describing confusion. Viewers would later watch this footage knowing what he had already done. At the time, some saw a distraught husband. Others, even then, detected something incongruent in his demeanor, a flatness or a performative quality that they could not quite name but felt. For investigators, that footage became another piece of a growing pattern. They compared what he said publicly with what he had told them privately, noting shifts in detail, emphasis, and tone. They watched his body language not for entertainment, but for indications of stress, evasion, or rehearsed narrative. They weighed his statements against the hard data now beginning to arrive from technical sources. That data painted a more rigid picture than any spoken account. Cell phone records revealed movements and contacts before, during, and after the critical hours. Text messages between him and Shannon, between Shannon and her friends, and between him and the other woman formed a lattice of communication that made clear the nature of his affair and the depth of marital strain. GPS information from his work truck traced its path from the Frederick house to the oil site and back with time-stamped precision. The alignment of this data with the neighbor's footage narrowed the possible interpretations significantly. The early morning loading, the drive to a specific remote site, the length of time he remained there, and the fact that he was the only person known to have had access to both the family and that location formed a pattern that could not be dismissed as coincidence. As the hours turned into days without any sign of Shannon or the girls appearing somewhere else alive, the window for benign explanations closed. The case, internally, shifted from missing persons to suspected homicide, even before bodies had been found. The man at the center moved, in the eyes of investigators, from a primary informant and potential secondary victim of tragedy to a person of particular interest, whose claims needed to be tested to the fullest extent possible. He was brought in for extended questioning. The interview rooms in which these conversations took place are stripped spaces, neutral walls, a table, chairs, perhaps a small clock. Cameras, unobtrusive but present, record every moment. The atmosphere in such rooms is not inherently adversarial. It is controlled. Investigators ask questions in measured tones, returning to key points repeatedly, comparing answers not only to previous statements but to known facts from external records. He recounted again his version of the night. He described going to bed, waking up, talking with Shannon about their relationship, leaving for work, receiving messages from her friend, coming home to find her gone. The broad outline did not change. Yet within this outline, details shifted subtly, exact times, the way certain topics were discussed, his responses to them, what the girls were doing at specific moments. Against the backdrop of the data now available, these shifts mattered. They distinguished between someone misremembering under stress and someone adjusting a story to fit new information. When confronted with contradictions, between his account and GPS logs, between his statements and phone records, he hesitated, rephrased, deflected. At a certain point, investigators proposed a polygraph examination. Polygraphs do not read minds, but they do measure physiological responses associated, statistically, with deception under certain conditions. Agreeing to such a test is often presented as an opportunity for a subject to demonstrate that they are being truthful. Declining can carry its own implications. In this case, he consented. The test was administered by a specialist trained to conduct such examinations and to interpret their results. Sensors were placed to monitor breathing, perspiration, heart rate. The questions asked were clear, directed at core issues, whether he had physically harmed his wife, whether he knew where his family was, whether he was lying about key aspects of his story. The environment was quiet, controlled, the procedures explained in advance. When the examination concluded, and the readings were assessed, the indications pointed away from honesty. The analysis suggested that his physiological responses during critical questions were inconsistent with truthful answers. Combined with the other evidence, this outcome significantly diminished any remaining credibility his narrative might have had. Back in the interview room, the tone shifted. Where earlier questions had allowed for wide, open-ended answers, they now tightened around the discrepancies. Investigators laid out, in calm, methodical fashion, the points at which his story conflicted with external facts. The weight of the polygraph results, the GPS data, the phone records, the neighbor's video, and the physical condition of the house were placed, metaphorically, on the table between them. He faced a narrowing set of options: maintain the initial story in the face of mounting evidence, admit partial involvement, or move toward fuller disclosure. The first option was increasingly untenable. The third carried consequences he had spent days, perhaps weeks, avoiding. The second offered, for a moment, a compromise, an admission that acknowledged reality while attempting to shift the character of his culpability. It was at this juncture that he presented an alternative version of events. In this account, he did not deny that Shannon was dead or that he had killed her. Instead, he claimed that he had done so in response to having found that she had harmed the children. This narrative preserved, in his representation, the image of himself as a father who had not initiated violence against his daughters. It recast him as someone reacting, however excessively, to an unimaginable provocation. From a certain angle, this version may have appeared to him to offer a more bearable identity. It did not align, however, with what investigators already suspected and what physical evidence would shortly confirm. It also introduced a new layer of pain for Shannon's family, shifting blame onto a woman who was no longer alive to defend herself. Even before the recovery of the bodies, this account met skepticism among those who had observed her with her children and who had read her messages from the days leading up to her death. As he shifted his story in this way, events at the oil site began to converge with the narrative unfolding in the interview room. Search teams, directed by the combination of his own admissions about the location and the GPS data, began a methodical examination of the area around the tanks. The open land, which had seemed so empty, became a grid to be walked, scanned, and probed. The disturbed soil near a particular point drew attention. The tanks themselves, noted in records as being at specific levels prior to that day, required careful, technically demanding inspection. The timing was tight. As the day wore on, the parallel processes, the interrogation of the man who had been last with Shannon and the physical search of the site he had visited, drew closer to producing answers that would either support or refute the version he had just offered. In the interview room, air conditioning hummed softly. At the site, the wind moved over open ground, carrying dust and faint chemical scents. In both places, the work proceeded with deliberate pace. When the first body was located and identified, the narrative could no longer be framed as an uncertain search. It was now, definitively, a homicide investigation with a primary suspect who had already placed himself at both scenes, home and oil site, and who had altered his story more than once in attempts to mitigate responsibility. Over time, the fixed markers of this landscape, the house, the truck, the oil site, the courtroom, came to coexist with another, less concrete map, the internal one carried by those who had followed the case closely. In that internal map, the house on Saratoga Trail is no longer just a structure. It is a sequence of remembered images. The front door under porch light at 2 in the morning. The narrow entryway opening toward the stairs. The path up to the landing where the loft spreads out, with the master bedroom to one side and the children's rooms to the other. The kitchen with its island, where lunch boxes were once filled and videos recorded. The living room, where toys were scattered and later removed. The basement, rarely glimpsed, a shadowed lower level that existed mostly as a concept. People who have never set foot in Frederick can reconstruct these spaces with startling accuracy, guided by the footage that entered the public domain. They can trace the likely path of Shannon's steps from the door to the bedroom after returning from the airport. They can imagine, with a kind of reluctant clarity, the route he took carrying bodies from bed to truck. The house, in this sense, has become less a home than a diagram of betrayal and aftermath. In contrast, the oil site exists in many minds as a place defined by distance and harshness. The ground is pale, stony, sparsely vegetated. The tanks rise from it with a sort of impersonal solidity. Fencing and signage mark the perimeter. The horizon feels larger there, the sky more exposed. Wind moves freely across the space, unimpeded by structures or trees. From the perspective of those who have watched documentary images of the site, it holds an austere, almost empty quality, which only deepens the disquiet of knowing what lay briefly beneath its surface and within its tanks. Between these two locations lies an abstract corridor, the road along which the truck traveled on that morning. Most viewers have only a general sense of this route. Highway, side roads, a progression from houses to open land. Yet in the imaginative reconstruction that inevitably accompanies engagement with such a case, this corridor takes on a symbolic weight. It becomes the connective tissue between domestic intimacy and industrial concealment, between the appearance of family life and the logistics of its destruction. The truck itself, a commonplace work vehicle, has assumed a similar duality. For years, it was simply part of a fleet, logged in company records, maintained according to schedule, sent to sites as needed. On the morning in question, it became, without changing shape or color, a vessel for something it was never meant to hold. Its storage compartments carried tools and equipment alongside wrapped bodies. Its cab contained a man whose identity as husband and father had already been severed in deed, though not yet in public understanding. These redefined meanings do not alter the function of trucks, houses, or industrial sites in general. They alter, instead, the way certain observers see specific instances of them at specific moments in time. The transformation is one of association. In households where the case has been discussed, the effect sometimes shows itself in small, fleeting ways. A parent loading children into a vehicle in early morning half-light may feel, for a brief second, the echo of an image seen in a documentary and move more gently. Aware of the trust those small hands and feet represent. A partner returning late from a trip might linger a moment longer in the entryway, noticing the details of the home with heightened appreciation. The shoes by the door, the faint sounds from upstairs, the accumulated signs of ordinary continuity. Others may find their thoughts drawn, involuntarily, to the case at odd times. Standing in a supermarket aisle, spotting a photograph of a smiling family on a product's packaging, they might remember how convincingly happiness can be presented in still images, and how incomplete a representation that can be. Hearing a friend describe marital strain, they may think, without voicing it, of the extreme and aberrant solution chosen in Frederick, as a reminder of how crucial it is that most people, even under pressure, choose differently. In professional contexts, particularly among those working in mental health, social services, and law enforcement, the Watts case has become one among a set of benchmark examples of what is sometimes called intimate partner homicide, combined with filicide and feminicide. Training materials might reference it when exploring the escalation patterns that precede such acts, the ways in which external stressors interact with internal vulnerabilities. Case conferences might examine its chronology to discuss intervention points that, in principle, could exist in other situations. Financial counseling, marital therapy, risk assessment, when certain combinations of warning signs appear. Yet even in such structured discussions, there is an acknowledgement that hindsight, with its clear knowledge of the outcome, can give a misleading sense of inevitability. Before the murders occurred, many of the elements present in the Watts family's life, financial difficulty, health stress, marital conflict, an affair, a new pregnancy, could be found in some combination in countless other households where no such violence ever takes place. The presence of these factors did not cause the crimes. They formed part of the context within which one individual made a series of catastrophic choices. That recognition tempers the impulse to treat the case as a direct template. Instead, it is approached as a severe outlier within a broader field, useful not because it reveals an easy diagnostic pattern, but because it illustrates how far from expected behavior a person can travel while still appearing, to many around them, to be functioning normally. The visibility of the case has also shaped public conversation about certain cultural expectations. The image of the ideal family man, steady job, suburban home, apparent involvement with children, was, on the surface, embodied by Chris in many of the pre-crime photographs and videos. He appeared in holiday pictures in coordinated outfits, in social media posts labeled with terms of affection, in clips where he played with his daughters. After the murders, these same images became unsettling, not because they were staged in bad faith at the time, but because they showed a person capable of terrible acts participating in scenes that viewers typically regard as markers of safety. This inversion challenges assumptions. It suggests that while such images can be part of a genuine story of care, they can also be, in some cases, snapshots taken along the way to something unrecognized and dangerous. The response to this realization need not be cynicism toward every smiling family photograph. Rather, it can be a sober understanding that the deeper truths of a relationship are not always accessible to external observers, even those relatively close to the people involved. For those who knew Shannon, this aspect of the case is particularly painful. They look back at photos and videos featuring her and see not only the energy and determination she brought to her life, but also the hints of strain that were not evident to casual viewers at the time. They recall conversations in which she expressed concerns and doubts, moments when she wondered aloud whether she was asking too much, whether she was too demanding, whether she might be at fault for his withdrawal. In private messages, she sometimes blamed herself for his distance, searching for ways to adjust her own behavior to recapture what she felt they had lost. This self-questioning is familiar to many people in relationships undergoing strain. In her case, it occurred against a background of deception she did not fully know about. The affair, the financial secrecy, the depth of his disengagement. These were not available to her in unmediated form before that final night. The knowledge of this imbalance adds another layer to the grief of her friends and family. They know now that she was striving to repair something whose foundation had already been eroded in ways she could not see. They hear her words in old messages with the overlay of hindsight, understanding that when she wrote of wanting to save her marriage, she was writing to someone who had, at least internally, moved beyond that desire. In Colorado and North Carolina, physical memorials have given the family and community focal points for their mourning. Graves hold the names of Shannon, Bella, Celeste, and Nico. Headstones mark their presence in the earth with carved dates that are painfully close together. Birth years followed too quickly by the same year of death. Visitors bring flowers, small toys, cards, and mementos. The act of tending these sites, of arranging items, cleaning granite, and straightening objects displaced by weather, provides a way to express care toward those who can no longer receive it in life. These places of remembrance exist in sharp contrast to the site where their bodies were initially hidden. One set of ground is formally consecrated as a resting place, visited openly, acknowledged by mourners and passers-by alike. The other was selected for its remoteness and presumed invisibility, used briefly as a means of concealment, then restored as far as possible to functional normalcy. The trajectory from one to the other, oil site to cemetery, is part of the larger arc from secrecy to exposure, from obscuring a crime to confronting it. In the years since, legal developments in Colorado have also provided a broader backdrop to the case. The state's eventual abolition of the death penalty, though not directly caused by this case, reframed retrospective discussion about the plea agreement. what had once been a trade between the possibility of execution and life imprisonment, came, in later analysis, to be viewed within a context where life sentences are now the maximum penalty. For some, this reinforced the sense that the outcome in the Watts case was, in its own way, aligned with the direction of policy. For others, it prompted renewed debates about proportionality and justice. Yet these policy-level discussions rarely penetrate deeply into the daily lives of those most affected. For them, the case does not exist primarily as a legal precedent or a sociocultural touchstone. It exists as the absence of voices at family gatherings, the empty spaces in photographs taken before August 2018, the awareness that certain lines in their family tree end abruptly. It surfaces unexpectedly in small moments, reaching for a phone to share a piece of news, only to remember that the person they would have called is no longer alive. Hearing a child's laughter in a supermarket aisle that echoes a tone once familiar in their own home, and feeling a surge of grief that has no immediate outlet. At the same time, there is evidence that the family has sought to define the narrative of their loved ones' lives in terms that extend beyond the crime. They have emphasized Shannon's determination, warmth, and capacity to endure hardship. They have shared stories of Bella's sensitivity, Celeste's boldness, the anticipated personality of Nico as imagined during the pregnancy. They have framed their advocacy and public statements around the dignity of the victims, rather than the notoriety of the perpetrator. In doing so, they have attempted to counteract the tendency of high-profile cases to center the person who caused the harm at the expense of those who suffered it. The man at the center of the case, meanwhile, has receded into the institutional anonymity of the prison system. Within that system, he is one of many inmates serving life sentences for serious crimes. His name may still attract attention outside, but inside, his daily life is structured less by his notoriety than by schedules and regulations that apply to all. He wakes, sleeps, eats, and works according to timetables not of his own making. His interactions are limited and monitored. Over the years, new inmates arrive and others die or are transferred, while his own status remains essentially unchanged. Occasional reports suggest that he has participated in correspondence, religious activities, or counseling programs. Whether these represent genuine attempts at reflection and remorse, or are, in part, efforts to construct a more tolerable self-image, is not something that can be determined from outside. His relationship to his own actions, his understanding of them, and the degree to which he confronts or avoids their reality are now matters largely confined to his own mind and to the confidential spaces of any therapeutic or pastoral encounters he may have. From a narrative perspective, his role after sentencing is static. He is the fixed point in a system designed to prevent further harm by limiting freedom. The dynamic elements of the story lie elsewhere, in the evolving grief of the families, in the shifting public interpretation of the case, in the continuing use of its lessons. imperfect and limited though they are, by professionals seeking to prevent or respond more effectively to similar situations. On quiet evenings, far from Frederick, someone watching a new documentary or reading an article about the case may find themselves pausing midway through, not because they have learned something entirely new, but because the weight of what they already know has settled in again. They may look around their own living space, noticing the ordinariness of their furniture, the personal items accumulated through routine, photographs, children's toys, unopened mail, a half-finished mug of tea. For a moment, the gulf between their life and the one that unfolded in the Watts home feels both immense and terrifyingly narrow, as they recognize that the architecture is similar, the external markers not so different, and that the true distinction lies in the unseen choices of the people who live within each structure. In that recognition, there is a hard but steadying truth. However much attention cases like this receive, however deeply they lodge in the public imagination, they remain exceptional. The vast majority of homes where stress, illness, financial strain, and even infidelity are present do not become crime scenes. Most people, even under intense pressure, do not choose the path that he chose. They endure, they seek help, they leave, they start over, they fail and rebuild, but they do not annihilate. The story of the Watts family stands, therefore, not as a prediction, but as a stark boundary marker in the landscape of human possibility. A point that shows how far a person can deviate from the commitments that hold families together, and what the consequences of that deviation look like in lived, specific detail. It is in that lived detail, the driveway at dawn, the quiet of the house when it should have been noisy, the tank hatches opening over an expanse of oil, the stillness of a courtroom as sentences are read, that the narrative continues to exert its power, long after the headlines have drifted to other names and other towns. Years pass, and yet the contours of this story do not soften so much as settle. The dates associated with it move steadily backward on the timeline of recent memory, overtaken by other news, other crises, other names. New subdivisions are built on the edges of other towns. New cases emerge and briefly occupy the same space in the public imagination. But the arc that began in the gray light over Frederick retains its shape, and for a certain segment of people, it remains quietly present, like a landmark seen in peripheral vision whenever similar themes appear. One of the more persistent aspects of that presence lies in the digital record Shannon left behind. Her videos, once posted to closed groups and personal pages, have been copied, archived, excerpted, and redistributed across multiple platforms. Some appear in full within documentary frameworks. Others have been trimmed to brief clips, stripped from context, and embedded in comment threads or informal analyses. Her voice, inflection, and expression can be called up on a phone in seconds by anyone who knows what to search for. This availability has an ambiguous effect. On one hand, it allows those who cared about her to revisit her on their own terms. They can watch a favorite clip in which she laughs in a certain way, or see again the moment when she tells the girls she loves them in a casual, unguarded setting. They can hold onto the lived texture of her presence rather than reducing her memory to a static photograph or a line in an obituary. On the other hand, it means that her image and voice now circulate far beyond the control of those who knew her. Strangers comment on her mannerisms, her parenting style, her tone with her husband. They form opinions based on curated segments of her life, sometimes sympathetic, sometimes critical, often unaware of how their words might land if read by family members who stumble across them. The transformation of a person into a subject of endless discussion, long after they have lost the ability to speak for themselves, is one of the quieter costs of a case that unfolds so thoroughly in public view. The girls, too, live on in captured moments. Videos of them singing, playing, resisting certain foods, clinging to their parents, have become part of the shared imagery of the case. People who never met them can recognize their faces, identify their voices, recall specific gestures, the way one tilted her head when questioned, the way the other moved with a kind of early, fearless confidence. These details, harmless in isolation, are now loaded with the knowledge of what would happen to them, creating a dissonance that viewers often find difficult to process. In some households, these videos are never watched. Family members have made the decision that certain recordings are too painful to revisit, or that the version of the children preserved in their own memories suffices. Others, at specific times, birthdays, anniversaries, or periods of acute longing, choose to press play, allowing themselves to experience both the sweetness of the moment and the renewed grief it inevitably brings. The control they exercise over when and how they do this stands in contrast to the uncontrolled circulation of the same clips online. The house on Saratoga Trail, meanwhile, continues its slow incorporation into the ordinary passage of years. At various points, prospective buyers or investors have considered it. Legal notices have been posted, removed, replaced. Real estate listings may have appeared with careful language, addressing or omitting its history in accordance with local disclosure rules. Some people have driven past, deliberately, to see for themselves the site whose images they know from screens. Others avoid the street altogether, unwilling to turn a private tragedy into a form of morbid tourism. For those who live nearby, the house has become part of the background again, though never entirely neutral. Children who were very young at the time of the murders, or who were born afterward, grow up hearing fragments of the story, snatches from adults' conversations, mentions at school, references in local news. For them, the house is both just another building and the locus of something they know only in outline: a father, a mother, and 2 little girls who once lived there and are now gone. Their understanding, filtered through age and distance, may be simpler than that of adults, but is not necessarily less accurate. They grasp that a place can look ordinary from the outside and still have contained profound harm. They learn, indirectly, that trust within a family is as essential as walls and locks in creating safety. They may internalize, without fully articulating it, the idea that paying attention to others' distress and speaking up when something feels deeply wrong are important responsibilities. The oil site recedes further from public conversation. Its main appearance now is historical, a location marked on maps in documentaries, a set of coordinates in investigative reports. On the ground, it continues to function as part of an industrial system focused on volumes, pressures, and flow rates. Workers who were not present in 2018 perform their tasks as they would at any other installation. For those who were there during the recovery, however, certain sensory memories remain indelible. The angle of light, the smell of oil mingled with earth, the sound of equipment operating in a context that temporarily transcended its usual purpose. Within the prison walls, years accumulate with a sameness that is difficult to convey. Days follow a predictable pattern: counts, meals, work or program assignments, limited recreation, enforced idleness, lights dimming and brightening at prescribed times. Seasonal changes are perceptible only in the quality of light in small windows or in the clothing afforded for outdoor periods. News of events in the outside world arrives in incomplete forms: snippets from television, comments from other inmates, occasional letters. The man serving multiple life sentences lives his entire experience now within this constrained environment. He is no longer photographed at barbecues or family outings. No new images of him in everyday life are created. The last widely circulated photographs of him outside a prison context are those taken before or during the early stages of the case: snapshots with the girls, frames from home videos, footage from brief interviews. The person in those images and the inmate moving along a cinder block corridor share a continuous identity, but their circumstances have diverged completely. At times, reports surface about his attempts to frame his own understanding of what he did. He may write to people who reach out, offering explanations, expressing feelings that range from regret to self-justification. He may participate in religious or counseling programs that encourage confession, reflection, and repentance. Observers outside often debate the sincerity or meaning of these actions. Yet in a sense, their authenticity or lack thereof does not alter the external reality. His victims remain dead. He remains confined. In academic contexts, the Watts case continues to be referenced as part of broader studies on family annihilation, domestic homicide, and the role of contemporary pressures in extreme outcomes. Researchers examine it alongside other cases, coding data points, age, employment, relationship history, financial status, presence of affairs, prior criminal records, mental health indicators. They insert these into spreadsheets and models, looking for patterns that might inform risk assessment tools. In their work, the specificity of individual lives becomes part of an aggregated data set. It is a necessary abstraction for analysis, but it stands in tension with the particularity of the people involved. Some scholars focus on the intersection of social media and crime. They analyze how the curated nature of public self-presentation can complicate both perception and intervention. In the Watts case, they note how Shannon's posts created a consistent narrative of a thriving family, even as private texts revealed significant strain. They discuss whether this discrepancy made it harder for those around her to fully grasp the severity of the situation, or whether, conversely, her openness about certain struggles provided more leverage points for concern than might otherwise have existed. Others look at the gendered dimensions of the story. They examine expectations placed on men as providers and on women as managers of emotional and domestic labor. They consider how cultural scripts around masculinity and success might have shaped Chris's internal responses to financial pressure, perceived loss of control, and the prospect of a diminished lifestyle following separation. They explore how Shannon's public identity as a determined, outspoken woman navigating illness and entrepreneurship may have intersected with traditional expectations of wives and mothers in ways that both empowered and exposed her. These analyses do not excuse or justify, they attempt to understand. Understanding, in this context, is not about empathy with the perpetrator in a sentimental sense. It is about mapping the conditions under which certain catastrophic decisions become conceivable to specific individuals, in the hope that identifying those conditions might one day support prevention or earlier intervention in other, still unknown cases. For the broader audience of true crime consumers, the Watts case remains one of several that periodically resurfaces in recommended cues and program lineups. New viewers encounter it for the first time, often drawn in by the visual richness of the available material, real footage instead of reenactments, genuine messages instead of reconstructed dialogue. Each viewing adds another layer to the case's presence in the cultural archive, as discussions are renewed in online spaces, opinions restated, theories revisited. Among these viewers, reactions vary widely. Some find themselves deeply affected, unable to stop thinking about the details, haunted by the image of the girls, distressed by Shannon's recorded hopefulness in her pregnancy videos. Others treat the story more analytically, focusing on investigative techniques, legal strategies, or psychological profiles. Still others view it briefly, then move on, filing it away as one more narrative in a crowded field. What is consistent, however, is the sense that once the story is known in full, it cannot be entirely unknown. Its key elements: the early morning loading of the truck, the concealment at the oil site, the contradictions between public image and private reality, the folding of multiple life sentences into a single, contained future, tend to remain lodged in memory. They may not be consciously recalled often, but they shape, at a low level, how people think about safety, trust, and the fragility of human arrangements. In some cases, the influence is quiet and constructive. A person under strain, contemplating an affair or feeling overwhelmed by financial burden and family obligations, might recall this story at the edge of their awareness. They may feel a subtle recoil from the precipice it represents, choosing instead to seek help, to speak honestly with a partner, to accept the pain of divorce or downsizing rather than retreat into secret fantasies of total erasure. In other cases, the influence is simply a heightened attentiveness to the inner lives of those close to them. A friend who begins to withdraw, a partner whose mood changes markedly, a relative whose financial situation becomes suddenly opaque. These shifts might now prompt questions asked sooner, with more persistence. No one case can teach people exactly how to respond in every situation, but this one has emphasized, in a way that cannot be ignored, the potential cost of letting certain kinds of silence go unchallenged. The town of Frederick continues its own life beyond the shadow of this case. New schools open, new businesses arrive, parks are built or renovated. Residents organize community events, elections are held, local issues are debated. For those who move there now, the association with a high-profile crime may be something they learn secondhand, if at all. For longer-term residents, the case remains a chapter in the town's history, one that is neither the defining feature of the place nor something that can be cleanly separated from it. The physical environment itself offers no commentary. Winters bring snow to the rooftops of the subdivision. Springs green the small lawns. Summers bake the streets in dry heat. Autumns scatter leaves across driveways and sidewalks. The same cycles that operated before the murders continue unabated after them, indifferent to the presence or absence of any particular family within any particular house. In the end, what distinguishes this story and ensures its endurance is not the uniqueness of its setting, but the unsettling combination of its ordinary exterior and its extraordinary interior rupture. It is the sight of a porch light illuminating a door in the night, knowing what will happen beyond it. It is the knowledge that a man capable of loading his daughters into car seats for ordinary outings also loaded their bodies into tanks. It is the realization that a woman who spoke passionately about resilience and gratitude was at the same time more vulnerable than she knew to decisions being made by the person closest to her. These realizations do not offer comfort. They do, however, illuminate the stakes of everyday choices in stark relief. Somewhere, as the story continues to be told and retold, another parent is standing in a driveway at dawn, watching the sky lighten over a quiet street. Another partner is returning home from a business trip, wheeling a suitcase up familiar steps. Another family is sitting down at a kitchen island to eat breakfast, unaware of how precious the ordinariness of that act will one day seem. The case of the Watts family moves like a shadow alongside these moments, not to predict their outcome, but to remind that the integrity of a home rests less on its location or its design than on the ongoing, invisible decisions of those within it, to speak or to withhold, to seek help or to hide, to endure difficulty or to attempt escape at any cost. Those decisions, taken one by one in quiet rooms, determine whether a house remains what it was meant to be, a place of imperfect but genuine safety, or whether, As in Frederick in August 2018, it becomes the starting point of a story that will echo far beyond its walls. There is, in the end, a particular kind of stillness that surrounds cases like this once the major events have all been catalogued. Not a silence of ignorance. Too much is known for that. But a quiet that comes after the facts have been arranged, when what remains are the long-term reverberations moving through individual lives and through the broader culture in faint, persistent waves. One of those waves moves through the way people now think about sudden rupture inside families that seemed structurally intact. Before Frederick, when someone said that a family seemed fine, the phrase often carried more weight. It suggested that while stress might have existed, there were no visible signs of imminent collapse. After Frederick, the same phrase is heard differently. It is understood as a description limited by vantage point, as an acknowledgement of what can be seen from porches, social media timelines, holiday photographs, and brief encounters at school events, but not as an assurance of what exists behind closed doors or inside private thoughts. The house in Colorado was not visibly fractured before August 2018. Bills were being paid, if erratically. Meals were prepared and eaten. Children were dressed, bathed, and taken to medical appointments. Extended family relationships, despite tensions, were being maintained. The social media accounts showed travel, affection, and shared goals. Yet beneath this, a separate narrative had already begun to form in one person's mind, a narrative that gradually detached him from the obligations that defined his role in that house. The friction between these two levels, external continuity and internal departure, is one of the elements that makes the case feel so deeply unsettling. In the months leading up to the murders, there were opportunities for divergence to take a different form. Divorce papers could have been drafted. A separation could have been announced. Financial hardship could have been confronted in the open rather than managed through concealment and wishful thinking. None of these routes would have been painless. All would have left scars. But they would have preserved the possibility of life continuing for those who were most vulnerable. Instead, the divergence culminated in an act of erasure. That act did not occur in a burst of uncontrolled chaos. It followed, as the record shows, a series of decisions taken over time, decisions to maintain secrecy, to nurture fantasy, to tolerate internal justifications that gradually recast other human beings. The wife who had shared a decade of life with him, the children who depended on him absolutely, as components of a problem to be solved. It is this process, more than any individual moment of violence, that continues to trouble those who contemplate the case in depth. They may accept that human beings are capable of rage, of impulsive harm, of acts committed in seconds that they immediately regret. Such events, though devastating, can be located within familiar frameworks of loss of control. What happened in Frederick, however, involved not only an eruption of violence, but the crossing of multiple deliberate thresholds after that violence, the carrying of bodies, the drive to a remote location, the concealment of remains, the return to a house now emptied of the people who once animated it. Each threshold crossed made retreat more difficult. Each practical step taken toward concealment solidified an internal rewriting of reality, from "I have done something irreversible" to "this must be managed in a way that allows me to continue." That progression is chilling because it suggests not a momentary collapse of restraint, but its systematic removal, layer by layer, in favor of an alternate logic in which continued personal comfort and image management outweighed the lives already ended. The case also exposes, with unusual clarity, the collision between two different forms of narrative, the one a person constructs for themselves, and the one that emerges when external records are brought to bear. In his mind, during those final weeks and days, he appears to have recast himself as a man suffocating under obligations, yearning for freedom, drawn toward a woman who represented escape. Within that self-story, his dissatisfaction justified certain breaches, emotional, financial, ethical, that he kept hidden. When investigators later assembled phone records, GPS coordinates, video footage, text messages, and physical evidence, they created a second narrative that did not depend on his self-perception. It was built from timestamps and trajectories, from the unambiguous traces left by devices and bodies. Where his internal narrative might have portrayed him as trapped, misunderstood, or pushed beyond endurance, the external record simply showed a sequence of actions, each chosen when other options existed. The friction between these narratives is visible in the interview footage. You see a man who still seems to be trying to inhabit that internal story of confusion, of partial knowledge, of reactive behavior, while facing a structure of facts that steadily constrains the space available for those claims. As that space narrows, he first offers distortions, then partial admissions, then a plea that acknowledges the core legal realities while leaving the deeper moral and psychological questions unresolved. Outside the institutional processes, those questions continue to circulate. Observers ask themselves how someone who once lifted his daughters into the air at birthday parties could later lift their bodies into tanks. They wonder what set of internal permissions had to shift for such a change to occur. They consider the long arc from early courtship and marriage, through moves and children and shared challenges, to the night when he walked from one room to another carrying lethal intent. There are no complete answers. Psychological frameworks can speak of narcissistic traits, of deficient empathy, of an inability to tolerate loss of image or status. Sociological frameworks can speak of masculine role expectations, of economic pressure, of cultural narratives that equate success with material stability and visible domestic perfection. But none of these frameworks, however sophisticated, can entirely bridge the gap between unhappy husband and man who kills his family. That gap, resistant to closure, becomes part of the case's lasting power. It functions as a void around which commentary circles. Some attempt to fill it with speculation, constructing elaborate theories about hidden personality disorders or secret histories. Others accept that there will always be a portion of his internal world that remains opaque, a set of thoughts and sensations in those final hours that are known only to him, and now unshareable. The unresolved nature of that void mirrors, in another way, the unresolved grief of those left behind. Shannon's parents, relatives, and close friends must live with the knowledge of how she and the children died without ever being able to inhabit their experience in those moments. They know, in the abstract, what was done to them. They know where their bodies were taken and how they were found. Yet the precise texture of their final perceptions, their understanding, their fear, their attempts to make sense of what was happening, remains beyond reach. To dwell too long on those imaginings risks overwhelming the mind. Often, therefore, the family's energy is directed instead toward preserving earlier memories. Bella's voice mispronouncing certain words, Celeste's quick bursts of enthusiasm, Shannon's determination as she pushed through fatigue to attend a school event or finish a work project. These recollections do not erase the manner of their deaths, but they insist that the weight of their lives is not measured solely by their end. In the wider world, the case has also altered the texture of certain everyday phrases. When someone now says that a husband is quiet or laid back, some listeners may unfairly feel a momentary flicker of unease, conditioned by having seen a quiet, laid-back man commit extraordinary harm. When others describe a social media feed as perfect, the word may carry an undercurrent of skepticism that it did not always bear, an awareness that perfection in presentation can sometimes mask profound instability. This shift is not entirely negative. A more critical stance toward curated images can encourage people to look past the surface, to ask deeper questions about their own lives and those of others. It can motivate them to check in more honestly with friends who always appear upbeat online, recognizing that constant positivity may sometimes coexist with unspoken strain. At the same time, there is a risk inherent in letting exceptional cases overly color perception. If every quiet partner, every financially stressed family, or every enthusiastic social media presence is viewed through the distorted lens of the Watts case, the result can be an atmosphere of unwarranted suspicion. The challenge is to hold both truths at once, that catastrophic betrayal can occur in ordinary-looking settings, and that in the overwhelming majority of such settings, it does not. The case also intersects with broader discussions about domestic violence and coercive control. Advocates have pointed to the importance of recognizing not only physical aggression, but patterns of manipulation, secrecy, and isolation that may precede more overt harm. In the Watts family, there were no public records of police calls for violence, no documented history of physical abuse prior to the murders. The danger manifested not as a slow, observable escalation of assaults, but as an abrupt, catastrophic breach. This pattern complicates intervention strategies that rely primarily on identifying clear, progressive warning signs. It suggests that while such signs are present in many cases, there will also be situations in which lethal violence emerges from a configuration of factors that do not closely match existing checklists. It underscores the importance of taking seriously any report of feeling unsafe, any intuition that a partner's internal world is becoming unreachable, even when no obvious physical aggression has yet occurred. At the level of policy and practice, these insights contribute to a gradual refinement of risk assessment tools and outreach programs. Helplines, shelters, and counseling services incorporate case studies that include family annihilation into their training materials, emphasizing that a partner's threats or fantasies of starting over without the family can carry serious implications. Financial counseling programs recognize that debt and perceived loss of status may combine with other stresses to create conditions that require careful attention. Yet for all these structural responses, the most significant impacts of the case still unfold at the human scale. A mother in a different state, struggling with chronic illness and financial instability, may watch the documentary and feel both fear and defiance. Fear, because she recognizes aspects of her life in Shannon's. Defiance, because she refuses to accept that vulnerability must end in tragedy. She might use that heightened awareness to seek support more proactively, to insist on transparency in finances, or to reevaluate a relationship that no longer feels safe. A man under pressure, having entered into an affair while still bound by family obligations, may find his thoughts drawn to the extreme outcome in Frederick. Even if he never had any inclination toward violence, the very existence of the case stands as a stark boundary marker, a reminder of how deeply destructive certain paths can become when combined with secrecy and an unwillingness to face practical consequences. Somewhere, a friend who receives late-night messages from a woman describing her partner's sudden emotional withdrawal might remember Shannon's texts from those final weeks and choose to respond with more urgency, encouraging her to document her concerns, to seek professional advice, to involve others if she feels in danger. These acts may not be traceable back to the Watts case in any formal way, but they are part of the diffuse influence that such a story exerts once it has entered the collective consciousness. As the calendar moves further away from 2018, the case shifts gradually from recent event to historical reference, but the emotional charge it carries remains. New viewers who were teenagers at the time of the murders, or who lived in other countries and only encounter the story later, experience it without the overlay of real-time media saturation. For them, the case arrives as a complete narrative, beginning, middle, and legal resolution already in place. Yet even in this packaged form, it retains the capacity to unsettle, precisely because it unfolds not in distant institutions or criminal subcultures, but in the most intimate of spaces, a bedroom, a child's room, a family kitchen at dawn. In that intimacy lies the enduring force of the story. It continues to remind those who encounter it that the most consequential decisions people make about one another are often taken in private, in the confines of shared homes, in the hours when no one else is watching. It underscores that the trust implicit in living together, sleeping beside someone, leaving children in their care, building a life around an assumed mutual commitment, is both precious and, in rare but devastating cases, tragically misplaced. The Watts family's story does not offer a formula for preventing all such tragedies. What it offers, instead, is a clear, unflinching view of what it looks like when the fundamental responsibilities of partnership and parenthood are abandoned in favor of a catastrophic attempt to erase conflict rather than confront it. That view, once seen, tends to linger in the background of many people's thinking, not as a constant preoccupation, but as a quiet, steady reminder of what is at stake in the ordinary choices that make up domestic life. And so the images remain: a driveway under half light, a truck reversing toward a garage, a woman stepping through her front door, unaware that she will never again emerge, two small girls sleeping in rooms decorated with their favorite colors, an oil sight under an open sky, a courtroom where sentences are spoken in a flat tone that nevertheless carries immense weight. They form a sequence that continues to be revisited, not because anyone wishes to dwell on horror for its own sake, but because, in its specific and painful detail, this sequence reveals how fragile and how profoundly important the everyday structures of trust truly are. Long after the cameras have left and the legal documents have been filed away, the story's weight settles into a quieter, more enduring form. It is no longer about breaking news alerts or rapidly updated headlines. Instead, it becomes part of the background fabric of how people understand the possibilities contained within a home, within a marriage, within a family that appears from the outside to be functioning. In that background, certain small details from the case take on symbolic significance disproportionate to their physical size. The framed phrases on the Watts walls, the ones that spoke of gratitude, love, and family, still appear in photographs taken during walk-throughs of the house. They were chosen, purchased, and hung in a different emotional climate, when those words described aspirations the adults in that house believed they could reach. After the murders, those same decorations became unintentional commentary on the gap between what a family declares itself to be and what its members actually do. Viewers remembering those signs may find themselves looking at similar objects in their own homes with new eyes. A plaque that reads, "Family is everything," for instance, might once have blended into the visual noise of Dacre. After absorbing the Watts case, someone might pause for an extra moment when passing it, mentally checking whether the behaviors in their household truly support what the words claim. The object remains the same. The awareness surrounding it has altered. Photographs of the girls, too, have acquired a dual existence. They are, for the family, records of real days, trips, holiday mornings, routine moments captured spontaneously. For the wider public, they have become part of a visual lexicon of loss. People who never met them can describe pictures in which Bella looks solemnly at the camera, or Celeste beams with uninhibited delight, or both stand side by side in coordinated outfits. These images now occupy a space similar to that held by other widely recognized photographs of victims in notorious crimes, at once specific individuals and representations of innocence destroyed. In private homes far from Colorado, those images have sometimes prompted conversations between parents and older children. A teenager, having watched a documentary or encountered an article online, might ask a parent how such a thing could happen, how a father could act in that way. The parent, grappling with their own inability to fully answer, may nevertheless try to frame a response in terms of responsibility, mental distortion, and the absolute unacceptability of harming those who depend on you. These conversations may be halting, incomplete, but they represent one of the subtle ways in which the case feeds into moral education across distance. Within correctional institutions, the case belongs to a different kind of archive. Those who work in prisons, officers, counselors, chaplains, know him not primarily as the subject of documentaries, but as an inmate with a number, a file, and a specific set of restrictions. His background is recorded, his notoriety is noted. Yet in the day-to-day running of a facility, he becomes, in many respects, one among hundreds of men whose lives have been narrowed to a small set of permitted movements. In that environment, high-profile offenders sometimes occupy a paradoxical position. They are known by name outside, but inside their experience is shaped by the same institutional routines that govern everyone else. He eats the same meals at the same times in the same hall. He stands for the same counts. He is subject to the same disciplinary mechanisms for infractions, the same limited avenues for small privileges. The enormity of his crime does not translate into special treatment in most aspects of daily life. Instead, it is reflected in the simple fact that his sentence has no end point. His inner experience of this reality is, for the most part, inaccessible. Long after official language has finished with a case like this, after every charge has been read into the record, every sentence signed, every report filed, what remains is a different kind of record, made up not of documents but of impressions. The images stay first. A pickup reversing slowly toward a garage in a colorless pre-dawn. The soft spread of light from a neighbor's porch, barely touching the edge of the driveway. The house itself, so ordinary it could be mistaken for any other. Pale siding, short walkway, a vehicle in front, nothing broken, nothing visibly wrong. Yet in the mind, that house ceases to be interchangeable. It becomes a fixed point in a map of remembered harm. Other images join it and refuse to leave. The blurred interior views from a body-worn camera moving through the rooms on the first day of the welfare check. A kitchen with surfaces cleared. A couch with cushions slightly displaced. Stairs leading up to a landing where there is no sound from children's voices. A phone lying on a counter, its screen dark. A handbag left as if its owner intended to pick it up again within minutes. The master bedroom, with its stripped mattress, no longer a place of rest but a site of unspoken questions. Then there are the images from the oil site. Tanks standing under newly bright sky metal structures that had existed for years without drawing particular notice, now framed in careful shots with coordinates and context. The ground around them, disturbed in specific patterns that only trained eyes would initially recognize. Later, the sight of equipment raised and lowered, ladders climbed, hatches opened, all under a kind of subdued concentration as those present prepared to recover what had been hidden there. Those are the visuals that most people can recall. But beneath them, over time, a more intricate layer develops, made not of scenes but of connections. Between one decision and another, between one person's private thoughts and the larger systems within which they were moving. In the months and years before the murders, the lives unfolding in that Frederick house were shaped by factors that, taken individually, were not unique. There was chronic illness, with its cycles of flare and remission, its demand for careful scheduling and its financial consequences. There was debt that refused to disappear, despite bankruptcy and repeated attempts at restructuring. There were the particular pressures of an income built partly on performance and self-presentation, where energy had to be spent not only on doing work, but on appearing to do it successfully. There was also, increasingly, the presence of another relationship. In a different story, each of these elements might have been contained within the difficult but familiar boundaries of marital strain, arguments, temporary separations, counseling, or divorce. In this story, they were components in a process that moved, quietly at first, toward a more radical break. What is most striking in retrospect is not simply that he chose an extramarital relationship, or that he considered leaving his marriage. Such choices, while painful and consequential, are common. It is the path he took instead of an open separation that gives this case its enduring gravity. At some point, he began to imagine a future in which he was no longer burdened by the concrete realities of his existing life, the mortgage, the medical bills, the routines of family care. In that imagined life, he would be free to align himself with someone who knew him only through the lens of this new beginning. The problem in his mind was how to get from one state to the other without passing through the stages that most people accept as unavoidable: confession, confrontation, legal disentanglement, financial loss. That internal avoidance is where the narrative shifts decisively. Having decided, at least in fantasy, that he should have a different life, he slowly allowed the constraints that protected his family to weaken. Secrecy replaced transparency. Financial choices were made with one eye on a future that did not include his current obligations. Emotional engagement with his wife and children diminished as he invested more of his attention elsewhere. It is not that he woke one night a changed person. It is that he gradually became capable of considering, then rehearsing, and eventually enacting a solution that treated his family not as people to be dealt with honestly, but as obstacles to be removed. The crime itself, the sequence of acts within the house and at the oil site, has been described, analyzed, and reconstructed many times. What remains most disturbing on repeated viewing is the degree of order within it. He does not appear to have been carried along by a chaotic outburst. He moves through the house with purposeful focus. He loads the truck in a structured way. He drives to a place he knows well, uses equipment with which he is familiar, and employs the features of that site to conceal what he has done. Then he returns, cleansed of visible traces, and steps back into the facade of an ordinary day. That return is one of the case's most chilling elements. He walks again across the same threshold his wife crossed when she arrived from the airport only hours earlier. He moves through the same rooms that held his daughter's beds and toys the day before. He dresses, speaks, and occupies space in a way meant to suggest continuity. Outwardly, he inhabits the role of husband and father whose family is inexplicably missing. Inwardly, he knows they are not missing at all. They are exactly where he left them. The investigative process that follows is, in many ways, a demonstration of how modern systems of record intersect with human behavior. What exposes his deceptions is not a dramatic confession uttered in a moment of remorse, but the steady accretion of mismatches between his account and the data. Phone logs show that his communications with Shannon and the other woman followed patterns inconsistent with his claims of confusion. Text messages reveal that his emotional disengagement was noticed and named by those around him. GPS data from his work truck shows that he was at a specific remote site at a specific time, which, in combination with the neighbor's footage, undermines any suggestion that he merely drove aimlessly for work. The footage from the neighbor's security camera, in particular, has become emblematic. Those grainy images, capturing only indistinct forms moving between house and truck, would in another context be of interest only to the homeowner. In this one, they provide visual confirmation that the truck was backed into the driveway, that multiple trips were made between the interior and the rear, and that this activity occurred at an hour when no one else in the household was seen leaving on foot or in the SUV. It is striking that this footage, and the officer's careful attention to it, represent the exact opposite of what the perpetrator was counting on. He relied on the idea that the early morning would shield his actions, that what happened between garage and truck would be screened from public view by darkness and routine anonymity. Instead, a neighbor's decision to install a camera for his own security and curiosity introduced an unsought witness into the narrative, a witness that did not forget, did not misremember, and did not have to be persuaded. The subsequent polygraph examination and interview sequence further illustrate how quickly internal stories can collapse when placed under systematic scrutiny. In the interview room, with the polygraph results indicating deception, and with investigators calmly presenting evidence that contradicted his prior account, he attempted a partial pivot, acknowledging that he had killed Shannon, but claiming that he did so only after finding that she had harmed the children. This narrative, while perhaps more tolerable to him than full responsibility, could not withstand the combined weight of the physical evidence, the documented history of his relationship with the children, and the logistical realities of the disposal site. That attempt to shift blame onto the woman he had already killed has remained one of the most deeply resented aspects of the case for her family. It did not succeed in altering the legal outcome. Autopsy findings, timelines, and forensic details undermined its plausibility. But the very fact that he deployed that narrative, even briefly, added an additional layer of injury, not content with ending her life. He tried to posthumously assign to her the most grievous act a mother can be accused of, in order to recast himself in a slightly less damning light. When the plea agreement was ultimately reached, it represented a convergence of several aims, ensuring that he would never again live outside a prison, sparing the families the ordeal of a long capital trial, and acknowledging the overwhelming nature of the evidence. The multiple life sentences, layered with additional years for related offenses, may not restore anything, but they formalize in legal language what is already understood morally, that his crime effectively removed him from the community he once occupied. Inside the courtroom on the day of sentencing, the atmosphere bore the particular weight that attends formal closure in such cases. The decorum, standing when the judge enters, addressing the court in measured tones, maintaining order among those present, sits in stark juxtaposition to the brutality of the acts being discussed. There is something unsettling in hearing the deaths of children and an unborn baby, and the disposal of bodies in tanks and a shallow grave, described in the flat cadence of legal terminology. Yet that very flatness is part of how the law expresses its authority, through categories, statutes, and structured sentences that convey, without drama, the gravity of the offense. The man at the center of this process becomes, in those documents, both a name and a defendant number. The specificity of his actions remains, but his identity is now embedded within the structure of the state's response. The same system that once processed his driver's license, his employment records, and his mortgage now processes him as an inmate serving life without the possibility of parole. His world has narrowed from the open spaces of Colorado and the interior of a suburban house to the confines of a cell and a schedule. Beyond the formal structures, the case's lingering impact is felt in the way it has reshaped certain conversations. In discussions about domestic violence and family annihilation, the Watts case is often used to illustrate a form of risk that is not always heralded by visible, escalating physical abuse. There were no prior police reports documenting assaults, no restraining orders, no neighbors describing loud fights, broken windows, or frequent visits from officers. The danger manifested in secrecy, in the internal crossing of lines, rather than in a long, publicly observable build-up. This does not mean that there were no warning signs. There were, especially in the months leading up to the murders, substantial indications of deep relational distress. His withdrawal, his change in demeanor, his refusal to engage emotionally, the discovery of an affair, the financial discrepancies, his ambiguous responses to the pregnancy. Shannon articulated these concerns in messages to friends, family, and, at times, to him. The record shows a woman aware that something was profoundly wrong, but still working within a framework where the worst she anticipated was abandonment or divorce, not annihilation. Her messages are especially painful to read in retrospect. They show someone attempting to interpret another person's behavior from the outside without access to his internal planning. She wonders if she is too controlling, if she has put too much pressure on him, if her illness and work have burdened him excessively. She tries to adjust, to plan conversations, to seek reassurance. These efforts reflect both her resilience and the limits of what one person can know about another's private resolve. The visibility of these messages, along with the video record of her daily life, has had a complex effect on the public understanding of her. On one level, they humanize her, moving her from the abstraction of victim to a fully realized person, a mother balancing illness, work, and parenting, a woman who loved her children intensely, someone who believed strongly in the possibility of creating a better life through effort. On another level, the exposure of such intimate material for public consumption raises uncomfortable questions about privacy after death, about who gets to decide how much of a person's interior life becomes content. For many viewers, however, the lasting impression of Shannon is not of perfection, but of determination. They see her pushing through fatigue to attend events with her daughters, traveling for work despite physical strain, and continually asserting that hardship could be overcome. They see her expressing fear and vulnerability to friends, acknowledging that her marriage is under strain, yet still advocating for her family. This complexity resists any reduction to the simplistic tropes that sometimes accompany true crime depictions of victims. As for the children, the disproportion between the brevity of their lives and the extent of their posthumous visibility is striking. Bella and Celeste did not live long enough to form the kind of extended biographical arcs that adults do. Yet the videos and photographs captured of them, walking through living rooms, playing, reacting to routine household events, have carried their presence far beyond what anyone could have imagined. Strangers feel that they know these children to a degree because they have seen them move and heard them speak. That sense of knowing is illusory, in the strict sense. No viewer could truly understand the fullness of their personalities from brief clips, yet the emotional impact is real. The knowledge of how their lives ended infuses each remembered frame with a weight it did not originally carry. Their laughter, their small moments of frustration or excitement, are now watched through a lens of irrevocable loss. The unborn child, Nico, occupies a different but significant place in this emotional landscape. He appears in ultrasound images, in planned names, in ideas about how the family would look once he arrived. His existence is recorded primarily in the anticipatory language of those who awaited him, rather than in independent actions. Yet he is rightly counted among the dead. His life was emerging within an already strained system of relationships. His anticipated presence intensified that strain for the man who had already begun to imagine an alternate future without any children at all. In the wake of events like these, there is often an understandable impulse to look for a single cause, to locate the one factor that, if addressed, could prevent similar outcomes elsewhere. In reality, the case resists such simplification. It sits at the intersection of multiple dimensions: individual psychology, marital dynamics, economic pressure, cultural expectations, and the unique amplifying or distorting effects of social media. It illustrates how a person's refusal to confront ordinary consequences can, under certain conditions, mutate into something catastrophic. What it does make clear, however, is that the decisive space in which this particular tragedy unfolded was not primarily public, but private. The critical choices were made in the mind of one person, over days and weeks, then enacted in the interior of a house while others slept. The ultimate measures that might have altered that trajectory: true transparency with friends and family, an earlier and more decisive confrontation with his own willingness to harm, professional intervention, were never triggered in time. Those realities do not offer reassurance, but they offer a certain clarity. They suggest that while external systems, law enforcement, social services, community networks, can respond and adapt, there will always be limits to what they can predict or prevent. Much depends, in the end, on individual decisions at moments that pass without notice by anyone else. It is perhaps for this reason that the Watts case lingers in the imagination more than some others. It is not only a story about a crime and its investigation. It is, at a deeper level, a story about how far one person can drift from the responsibilities they publicly claim to uphold without visible rupture until the moment of irreversible action. It pushes observers to contemplate uncomfortable questions about their own lives, about the representations they present to others, about the pressures they conceal, about the ways they might be tempted to resolve conflict by evasion rather than by hard, honest engagement. In thousands of other houses built on similar streets, in similar towns, people get up in the half-light of early morning and move through familiar routines. A parent steps quietly into a child's room to wake them for school. A partner lies awake, thinking about unpaid bills or a difficult conversation that needs to happen. A truck is loaded for work with tools and equipment, nothing more. Most of these scenes pass without violence. The day unfolds, with its annoyances and small satisfactions, and the family regathers at night. The case from Frederick stands in the background of these ordinary days, not to suggest that catastrophe is always imminent, but to remind that the difference between a home remaining a place of refuge and becoming a crime scene depends, to a degree that cannot be overstated, on the unseen choices made within it. It is the knowledge of that dependence, made visible in such exacting detail in this case, that gives the story its lasting, somber resonance. A truck reversing in the gray before dawn. A house holding a silence no one outside yet understands. An industrial site absorbing, for a brief span of time, the evidence of a decision to erase rather than to face. A courtroom where that decision is translated into years that have no end point. These are the images that remain when the rest has faded, and it is through them that the story continues to exert its quiet, persistent weight on how people see their own lives, their own obligations, and the fragile, vital trust at the heart of every family.